Hey, I'm Pusher, and this is another Music Minute where we talk about how music works. And today we're doing an in-depth deconstruction of the Bruno Mars and Cardi B Finesse remix. So the original song came out on the 24K Magic album in November of 2016, but Bruno Mars felt like it wasn't the strongest cut and that it still had a lot of potential, so he did a revisit of it with Cardi B and put the thing out at the start of January 2018. And since then it's racked up more than 250 million views on YouTube. So I was first drawn to the song because of the In Living Color references, because I was a big fan of that show. If you don't know In Living Color, it was actually where both Jim Carrey and Jennifer Lopez got their start. So probably like a lot of people, I was drawn to it when I saw the video, but the song itself is a pretty tight and fresh pop production, and I feel like there's such an elegant simplicity in pop production that there's always something I can learn by looking close at it. So the song itself has a few different grooves and a few different moods. There's like a new jack swing, it's funky, it's soulful, there's like an effortless kind of cool in the chorus, there's like a smooth R&B thing happening, and at the end it all comes together to make this big euphoric feeling. So before we break down the song, let's look at the global information. It's in 4/4 time, the tempo is 105 BPM, it's in the key of F minor, the relative of A flat major, and from the first beat to the last beat it's 3 minutes and 34 seconds. Here's a list of pretty much every sound that happens in the song. We obviously have Cardi B and Bruno Mars on leads. There's a trio of background singers supporting Bruno Mars, and then I sort of lumped a bunch of things into one vocal category. There are chopped up vocal samples, there are little fills that Cardi B does where she'll repeat the last word of a line, there are vocal effects, yells, woos, hey! As far as sound effects, there's a riser later in the song. There's one sound that's like a swipe or like a DJ scratch. For chords, you've got the main pad that's sort of like a maybe vocal sample thing or like an FM synthesis. Chords on the bigger sections are handled by a combination of three things. There's like a string pad, and then in the background, it's a lot harder to hear. There's sort of like a piano playing like a funky 16th note line. It's actually hard to tell with the piano. It might also be like a synth trumpet. It's hard to hear, and there's a lot going on in the big sections. But whether it's pianos or trumpets, it's doing the same thing. And they actually use orchestral hits, which is such like an indicator of 90s music. It was so overused in the 90s, apparently it was called like the Wilhelm scream of 90s music. As far as bass, of course, we've got a sub for the low layer, and there's a synth bass for the top layer that sort of makes like a bow sound. And then you've basically just got a whole assortment of drums. Kick, snare, hi-hats, it's like a low-mid percussion. There's a triangle that happens in like the fourth bar of every section. There's a tambourine that happens in the chorus and at the end of the song. And then there's like this mouth pop that happens in the choruses. Next, let's take a brief look at the form of the song. The song can be divided into 4 sections that I'm going to call acts. At the top, some of the section names have been lit in red, which basically shows you where the biggest, most intense sections in the song are. Act 1 has the drum intro, and then it's got a verse and a half of a pre-chorus with Cardi B rapping on it. This verse and pre-chorus were the only sections that were added from the original version to the remix. So Act 2 is where the song originally started, except for the drum intro. Here Bruno Mars sings a verse, a pre-chorus, and a chorus. This establishes the 3 main sections of the song. For almost every instrument, every melody, every drum beat, every rhythm, this is where it's all introduced. Now in music, especially pop music, repetition is really important. One of the things that pop writers and producers really focus on is how to get the song's claws into your memory as early as possible and how to make it stay in your memory for as long as possible. People talk about earworms, and there's a real art and science to getting a song to stay in your head. So Act 3, of course, is going to be basically the same as Act 2. It's got a verse, a pre-chorus, and a chorus, and there are some variations to it. In the form breakdown, you can see them mostly in the background vocals. But Bruno Mars' lead vocal also does a few variations to keep your ear interested. Now, Act 2 and Act 3 are the same, so you've heard the same thing twice now, so your ear and your brain are going to be expecting something a little bit different. So in Act 4, we start off with the last big change of the song. This is where we introduce the bridge. The bridge has a slightly different chord progression than the rest of the song, and the lyrics are different as well. This is meant to create a contrast with the repetition that you've heard so far. Then you've got a pre-chorus and a chorus. These two are a little different as well. The pre-chorus is much bigger than the previous ones, and the last chorus is much smaller than the previous ones. Of course, the last chorus is like a calm before the storm of the big finale, and the outro here is basically the same as a pre-chorus. But it's also got elements of other sections thrown into it to make this big synchrony moment where everything kind of comes together to end the song. Okay, let's talk about the chord progression. Where a lot of pop music will just use simple triads, Bruno Mars has a little bit more jazz and R&B influence. So the chords that you're going to see in a Bruno Mars song are going to be a lot more like you would see in a 90s pop song. You got D flat major 7 going to C7 and then to F minor, or flat 6, 5, 7, and 1 minor. Now in the bridge we've got something a little bit different in terms of chords. It's not dramatically different, but in the 4th bar we have a 2-5-1 turnaround that gets us from F minor back to D flat a little more smoothly. And in the 8th and final bar of the bridge we have a C7 that brings us back to the D flat, which is a strong dominant chord to create a sense of tension and forward momentum. And my big takeaways, the things I learned from analyzing this song. There are 2 things that happen almost all the time throughout the entire song. There's a triangle in bar 4. And if you listen close to it, it actually pans from right to left. It's like a playful element, and it also gets it out of the way of the vocals in the middle. And at the end of every 8-bar section, there's this snare motif. I think that pulls the song together beautifully, and I'll probably be using that trick in my own stuff. As far as distance in this song, I'm not really hearing too much. There is definitely a little bit of delay or possibly some reverb on the vocals, but it is so low, it's mostly meant to be felt and not heard. You can only really hear it when there's not too much going on in the track. That's how low it is. I really love the way the different chord sounds were layered in the pre-choruses and the big sections. Honestly, I've probably listened to this song for like 10 straight hours at this point, and I didn't even notice this like piano funky sound until I'd been listening to it for hours. But it works so well to add like an extra layer of harmony and funk and rhythm. A great arrangement trick that this song got me thinking about is contrast in the transitions between every 8-bar section of the song. As a producer, I know how easy it is to overthink aspects of putting a song together, but at the end of the day, what I think is most important is the ability to intuitively feel the ups and downs of the song on just one listen. I also really loved some of the stylistic throwbacks, not just the In Living Color reference in the video, but like the orchestral hits that haven't really been a thing for 20 years. And a lot of the sounds seem to have been carefully chosen to sound like 80s and 90s samples and synths, but updated for today's production and writing standards. It's like a really fresh take on like a classic sound. If you listen to the snares, almost every single one sounds different. What they've done is they've layered snares so you have your main snare sample, and then they'll put other snares or textures underneath it to make them all sound different. There's some really good tricks here for filling in some otherwise awkward space between vocal lines, whether it's Cardi B like repeating the last word of her phrase,
drop top Porsche, rollie on my wrist, diamonds up and down my chain,
or like making a sound, or maybe background vocals doing their own part, or like this echo delay effect on the last word of the phrase.
together.
These are really great tricks for keeping things moving when it would otherwise just be like an empty instrumental while you wait for the next line. It was so smart to layer in vocal samples with the snare rhythm off the top, just to make the song like more instantly recognizable right off the bat. One obviously pretty standard pop writing technique is to make sure you're saying the name of the song like 3 or 4 or 5 or more times in the chorus of the song, so that when people are listening to it casually, they can tell what the song name is without having to look at the file name and recognize it later. Talk about it and they can remember it. Years from now, they'll be answering trivia about it and they'll be able to know the name of the song. One thing I thought was interesting is that the verse and the chorus are really similar sort of low-key sections. So it would be really easy for these two sections to get monotonous when they happen side by side, like between acts 2 and 3. But just subtle changes in the background vocals and the drums makes it so that these two sections sound different. And then of course when you go back into the verse, you have the repetition from the first verse so that you know you've finished the chorus and you're sort of back at the top of this verse, pre-chorus, chorus form for act 3. Now I was already sort of aware of this and doing this in my own writing, but in that final outro, sort of cherry picking all the best hooks from all the sections throughout the song and making them happen at the same time is like a really good way to bring everything together, and it's like the big finale. Honestly, this song is nothing if not really well organized. And that's your Music Minute breakdown of the Finesse remix by Cardi B and Bruno Mars. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Tell your friends about it, tell your mom about it, tell your grandma about it. Or you've got questions or comments or suggestions for the next song that I should analyze, just leave those in the comments and I'll check it out. If you want to help support the creation of these videos, you can go to Patreon and sign up to send a small amount of money every time I release a Music Minute breakdown video. By becoming a patron, you can also unlock bonus content like early access to videos and in-depth song analysis PDFs. But until next time, I'm Pusher, and thanks for watching.